Okay, we're 1 minute over, so we'll start at, yeah, thank you for that thumbs up. We'll start at two minutes past. Just have to put up the disclaimer. It's there, and then we'll do the intros. Right, so my name's Matt Law, obviously co-founder and finance and project lead at Flamingo Logic. So just a little bit how this works. So basically, when you join, your camera's not on at all, so don't need to worry about that. You'll also be muted as you come in, but you can come off mute. So the idea of this is a collaborative session, so feel free to raise questions or add comment at any time. Just remember to come off mute. We've already showed the disclaimer. So just as a bit of a context for this session, as part of our technology roadmap, we are currently developing a rostering module. So I guess it's kind of front of mind for us. But the objective here is not so much on our system, it's to collaboratively explore what the most significant care sector and more specifically really NDIS rostering issues are and the possible solutions. And really the hope here is that you just come away with perhaps some new ways of approaching the problems, if not possible methods of solving them, irrespective of whatever systems that you are using. Cool. All right, so that is 2 minutes past. So I'll bring up the screen. So even if you want to redirect us onto any other problems, feel free to go for it. And we'll more than happily just go through that as well. But if I scroll down here, these are the two problems that we're planning on addressing, and I think we'll spend. So the idea would be to spend just under the first half on the short-term rostering, and then the rest of the time on disconnect between chargeable components, so the products that you charge to clients, and then the cost components, so the shift, which would be the cost component. All good with that? Yeah, right, let's continue. Okay, so short-term rostering. So first, just to define what that is, otherwise might be known what we call emergency rostering as well. But basically, this is the filling of near-term vacant shifts. So it's typically going to be at or after roster rollover. Depending on when you do a roster rollover, it will be between 0 to 6 weeks out, sometimes possibly even 0 to 8 weeks out. Obviously, the closest or the closest or nearest shifts to being performed are the most urgent. Oh, we just got someone coming in. I'll just admit them. Cool. And the highest peak in vacant shifts will usually occur just after rollover, particularly when you include, well, depending on how publishing works, when you include draft shifts as well, because typically they're going to roll over or copy from a template, and they're going to be initially considered draft shifts until they're published. So when doing short-term rostering, I guess the information is absolutely critical. So client information, so we can get client needs, what the support requirements are, any preferences a client has, location-based information as well. So where the shifts are going to occur and any access requirements or specific location requirements. The shift details itself, so what the type of the shift is, and does that change into, does that have an impact on the type of employee that needs to perform that shift, and then onto the employee attributes themselves. So cost aspects, overtime, penalty, shift impacts, time of day application, through to training, location and client-based experience. So what locations has that employee already worked at? Have they worked with that client before? How many hours have they clocked up with that client? What their availability is, and even down to, and if you get into this, you're doing really well, which is more the preference side of it. So the likes, do they have like hobbies or interests? If you get into that stage, then you're probably looking at must-haves versus nice-to-haves as well. So mandatory requirements, sometimes called hard versus soft requirements. Really, ideally, you don't want to duplicate any of this information directly onto the shift. So if you're going through a path of having to take client information, take location-based information, and put it directly onto shift. That's probably because it's stored somewhere else, or that you just can't reference it. So it's about access to, in its broadest sense, to the most relevant information, particularly when you've got somebody doing that, performing that role, like a rostering team or a rostering officer. It gets even more complex when you need to consider what detail you have on casual and agency employees as well, if you're starting to get into that basis. So a permanent employee can't fill that shift. You get into casuals and agencies, it'd be very typical to have less information on those employee types, particularly agency employees. And then also, you, depending on the work that's being performed, you might even be getting into volunteer space as well. So rostering team really needs access to this information in a digestible and usable way. That's absolutely critical. And is there any comments on that at all? The information. Cool. All right. So beyond then just the sheer amount of information required for the decision making of offering new employees, new staff members that shift, you've got just the audit trail of that activity as well. So I think understanding the activities that go into filling a shift that is near term, that was vacant, is crucial. You've got a huge amount of research that potentially goes into it from a rostering officer. You've got a high level of communications, both informal and formal. So formal would typically be an actual offer or an actual acceptance coming back, but as well, but the informal contacts as well, like escalation processes to a manager, just call in to fill in gaps in information that's required in order to know if somebody's a suitable match for a shift. So, that's really crucial information as well, because that's all useful to optimizing and improving the process going forward, as well as reporting to executives and managers, on the difficulty of filling near-term shifts. So who would you then broaden that out into not just filling the immediate shift, but reporting on holistically what happens in that near-term emergency rostering space? You've got very useful information if you can bring it into the system on who will typically accept or decline a shift, for example. So how many declines is one employee making? How many acceptance of emergency shifts is another employee making? That's all really useful information. Multi-channel communications as well. So here you're often sending text messages, there's emails going out in order to fill that shift. There's phone calls being made. So there's a lot of different channels of communication there that you're trying to bring into the system, collect relevant information on, as part of that, really understanding what goes into filling that vacant shift, and vacant shift ownership as well. So to me, you got we say like it's important. We see it's important to be able to allocate a shift to a rostering team member in that emergency space to know that they are working on it and that they are actively looking at it, and having a prioritization system as well for the most proximate shifts. So from a rostering office perspective, they need to know what they're working on. They need to be able to manage in those activities, and they also need really good access to all of that relevant information that we mentioned at the beginning in a very accessible, very timely fashion. Is there any more input or on any of that at all? Adam, you're on mute. Just say Adam used to work in rostering or manage a rostering team.
So as someone that's worked both in rostering, but also someone who's worked as a care coordinator and had the pleasure of, as many in the room would have, of doing on call after hours and on weekends, the rostering staff are very good at their job, and they understand who they can call, or if they're not using the system, they understand how the workflow. But for an on-call manager or somebody who is actually outside of hours, having that information to reduce risk and make it easy and time efficient is really important as well. So that information really is the key for those sort of staff, those sort of roles.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of leads us on to the next consideration then as well. So this is probably getting into the larger organization space, but one thing we really want to work on, not in the immediate sense in terms of our roadmap, but definitely in the long time frame of our rostering build journey, is the opportunity for greater levels of automation and use of artificial intelligence tools. So That really, the building blocks for that though are that perfect information, or the single source of truth, as we like to call it. That's so important for rostering, as we said, that because you need such a broad set of information on different stakeholders in order to maximize the potential to fill that shift. So, but by getting that, what would you call it, by getting that foundation of information correct, right, you're getting to the point where you could look at bringing in an artificial intelligence tool to either fill that shift, which would be kind of, I guess, the holy grail at rollover. And this would be a really at rollover or shift template copy timing. So as that comes across, there's shifts that are vacant. That would be the opportunity to really bring in this tool. But you could also, so even if it doesn't absolutely fill those shifts, and maybe you wouldn't want to jump to that at first, what it could do is present a preferred option to a user. So so rather than them having to do all of the research and look at what the options of the employees are, it could do that scoring mechanism and say, look, here's the preferred employee to perform this shift, or the preferred employees to perform this shift. That's something we'd definitely like to explore as well for this short-term rostering space. Typically, longer-term rostering, we think, would be copied from a template anyway. You'd have a plan, but it would really come into its own in that near-term rostering. Cool. I reckon that is a pretty good discussion on the first problem. If there's any more questions or input on that. Cool. All right. The bigger problem, well, not the bigger problem, that's probably a wrong way of saying it, but I think it's possibly more complex. I don't know, we'll see. So the disconnect with chargeable component and with the chargeable component to a client and the shift cost component. So I guess just to put a bit of context on this, and I know we did a previous webinar on this, but on the client journey, but typical client journey will be from inquiry, opportunity, so service opportunity, price estimate given, service agreement formed, service bookings are created, bookings are completed, and claims made. We won't go as far as payment and accounting, but the flip side of that on the employee side is or an element of the employee journey that's relevant here would be the rostered shift, which would be either generally created from a template, either from information within the booking or manually created, through to shift completion, through to timesheet records. And what we're doing there is we're identifying that there's definitely two distinct documents, really, that the booking, or we see it as that way, that the booking, which is going to become the chargeable component to the client, and the shift, which is going to become the timesheet and payable component to the employee or agency worker, they're not one and the same thing, but they are obviously very closely related. So similar, but not same document. And we can really explain that a bit in scenarios. So here we've got some extracts of what we're working on at the moment. So here you can see some booking lines. So here we've got a client with start dates, end dates, products, hourly, so an hourly unit of measure and what the price is for that services and some line amounts there. Then you can compare that. These are the shifts to perform that booking. Here we go. Then we've got so there'd be the employee performing the shift, and you've got start date, start time, end times as well. We've got what the support ratio here is. So this is a basic 1-to-1. So one staff member, one client. Context, we just use the term support receiver to avoid using client or customer, depending on what the organization uses. But that can be changed. Then we've got the cost components here. So shift costs. So you've got your cost product, if you will, which would be typically is going to be a base cost for the employee per hour plus the on costs. And then with time of day applications as well, so AM, PM, Saturday, Sunday, passive overnights, and so on. And then you've got the chargeable product, which would be, in this case, is the NDIS products, with their time of day applications as well. But at least here the units of measure match, and you can probably do some validation When we say validation, it just means confirming that everything's correct. You could do some validation directly between the shift itself and the booking with that unit of measure. But when you get into more complex scenarios like SIL, you don't have the same unit of measure, so it becomes even more complex. So here, example here we've got is the weekly SIL charge supported independent living chargeable item. So 1 week's worth of SIL support to this client, priced here per week. And then we've got all of the shifts that would go into it. More complex again, when we've got 2 bookings here of SIL. So 2 weekly amounts, 2 weekly prices for 2 different clients. And then we've got a roster performed that's effectively done for both of them. So here you've got some actually 1-to-1 shifts as well, but you've got 1-to-2 shifts, so 1 staff member, 2 clients here. So we've got the 2 weekly bookings, and then we've got the shifts that are performed to meet those bookings. So we've got the shifts that reference these, but very clearly in this instance, the booking document is not the same thing as the shift document. So that gives some context. So I guess to summarize the context of some of the problems here and complexities in the NDIS, I guess, is we've got different products on the chargeable side of it to the client versus the cost side of it. Typically, most organizations, I don't think would be looking at the cost side of it at all on the product. Normally there's just coming out of payroll. But if we do get it in advance here, we've got more opportunity about posting that to direct costs and doing far more reporting and direct validation on the booking itself and reporting of profit and loss at a more localized level. So it's useful to do that. But so to go back to the complexities, we've got the different products. We've also got, like if you use an agency staff or obviously casual staff, that those rates change, but we can bring that in. But there won't be, so if we get into the posting of, and we're getting into complexities here, but if you go to as far as posting these shifts or timesheet entries to direct costs, you're typically going to be posting it to direct costs with an offset in labor recovery to offset when your payroll hits in your accounting. So I'm talking about integrated accounting here. If you have agency staff, they're not going to be a payroll for them. As I said, you're going to be receiving an invoice from the agency. So it's a different offset. Instead of offsetting the labor, instead of using labor recovery, you're going to directly offset the agency invoices. However, if you do final post direct costs, even including agency timesheet entries, you've actually got the opportunity to raise the agency invoice. You could raise it directly or at least improve the check-in. And to be honest, in some very large organizations, there's quite substantial administration time that goes into checking agency invoices. So we've got those different unit of measures. We've got timing differences as well. So that time of day application can vary based on the NDIS requires, the chargeable side of it versus the cost side of it versus the shift side of it. Particularly if you're on an enterprise agreement that's got slight mismatches to the award as well. So there's even overtime elements that you could bring into that direct cost as well, which would be, there would be a potential to do that too. So you could kind of bring in elements of the award interpretation into this more direct stage rather than at the payroll stage. We went through the shared supports complexity as well. And we've gone through some of the claiming rules and adjustments. So you've got, so to illustrate some of the claiming rules and adjustments. In some scenarios, you can claim as per the, or go into claim as per the actual shift. But in some areas, the NDS, you could claim based on what's actually planned. And that's still weekly would be an example of that. So you get into quite unique areas of validating the claim as well, depending on the agreement that's been set up. So I guess what we're trying to illustrate there, or with those complexities, with those problems, and then we kind of touched on some of the possible solutions. But to go into more depth on possibly on the possible solutions now, you can take an approach of recognizing that the booking and the shift are different, but that they have a strong relationship between the two. And therefore, in order to solve these complex problems, developing that relationship is crucial. And so what we're looking at is having the shift be able to directly reference a booking line, and recognizing that was what we would call a many-to-many relationship. So many shift lines can have, or shifts can have a relationship with a booking line, and many booking lines can have a relationship with a shift. And we would need to be able to accommodate that. But some of the opportunities that come from that, if we can do it, which I'm sure we will be able, well, we're going to give it a very good crack, that's for sure. Is you can look at the creation of net zero invoices, which is what I alluded to there with posting to the direct cost. So if we've got our rostered shifts and timesheets and we're referencing that booking at the completion of the booking event, we can actually take that timesheet entry that references the booking, and we can post using those products and the costs associated with those products that we put against the shift element. We can actually post that to the accounting side of it at the time the booking is completed. And we can even factor in or look to deal with the complexities of the taking that information and splitting it between the clients as well. So where we have that one shift being done for 3 clients, we can actually take that cost, split it 3 ways, create 3 different records for that, 3 different net zero invoices, and post that directly. So what that then gives you the potential to do in terms of validation is you could create a client or service agreement based profit and loss, particularly if you're able to post that transaction to those elements on a accounting general ledger. So then you can do direct costs. So you can look at what the direct cost of the service delivery was for that client and compare it directly to the chargeable amounts, which is one really useful information for understanding sustainability over the long term, but it's also just a validation and a way of checking that those records were created correctly. Do they look sensible? Then even before the event, you've got the booking to shift reference calculations that can be done. So on the booking itself, we should be able to do a calculation, or we'll be able to do a calculation that looks at what those cost components are for that booking and compare it to the chargeable amount. And then you'd be able to report on that even in advance of the booking being completed, which is another really good check for, does this look sensible? Is this correct? Not all instances would it be relevant to compare or certainly at the hourly level, to compare the booking itself to the shift. But we also want to look at recognizing that this is a problem too, particularly in SIL. We want to look at comparing a template or expected service roster to the actual timesheet or roster that was performed for that SIL service. Because in that instance, it's very useful information to say that these were the shifts that were done for this weekly amount. Is this a sustainable service or not? That weekly amount doesn't in any way tell you what the service that you expected to perform was. That's going to be more within a templated roster. So definitely we feel it's important to be able to look at the potential to compare the template to the actual roster as well. And we're, I guess, dealing with the complexities here as well. And in order to automate a lot of the manual checks, which are typically done between studying what happened on the roster and comparing that to what is to be charged to the client, by referencing the booking and the shifts, we've got the opportunity to do, I guess, to validate the booking itself prior to what it's completed in a more automated way. So for some examples of that would be have all the shift times passed that are connected to this booking? Were the units of measure on the shift matching the booking or the template? So by unit of measure, I mean the total quantity of, say, hours being delivered. Are the hours on the shift matching the hours that were expected to be on the booking? And they may not match, and that may be, it's still correct, depending on the rules that are being applied. But that's still a check that can occur. And the idea would be, recognizing the complexities, you'd still need an element to say, yes, I accept that there is a mismatch and there's a reason for it. But it's an additional check which could automate those where they are matching to bypass that stage. And really, then you can go to, if they're validated, then the booking can proceed to claim in an automated fashion. So by having that shift reference the booking, we should be able to remove a lot of that administrative time, increase compliance, and remove the errors. So that is the problems that we see, or the main one of the largest problems that we see, and just some of the breakdown of the complexities of it, and some of the considerations that we're giving to how we approach it. We've got the benefit of, I guess, looking at it in an integrated way, because we've got the integrated accounting and integrating rostering with the whole claiming and booking side of it. But even if that wasn't the case, I think there would still be the opportunity to use and leverage this approach, just with integrations even between systems. So I still think there would be a potential there to certainly improve on a lot of the problems that we see now. Brilliant. Anything to add to that? Are there any questions at all? Jess, Adam, do you have anything to add to that? I am very aware that, particularly the second problem, there's a lot of complexity to that in terms of the products and pricing and the way bookings work and the way shifts can work. And it's not common to have a product or costing elements on a shift itself, particularly for a rostering team. Would not be used to seeing that, and that information they don't necessarily, well, I say they don't necessarily need to see, but it's actually useful information even to fill in a shift as well, to understand the cost impact of that could impact the choice. So yeah, I guess I'm very aware that could be new, but by having that, we can really start to do more on the validation side of it by comparing the cost and the chargeable items of a booking, and yeah, really dealing with some of those complexities, particularly where you've got shifts split across multiple clients. Jess, you're on mute there.
Oh, no, sorry, I just said yes, definitely. It would be great if anybody also had any other problems that they would like us to, I guess, respond to or look at for a future webinar as well, if you would find that helpful, or if you've also already solved some of the problems in another way, also be great to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. What we really just, it's just we're on a mission to basically lower costs for the sector, improve compliance, and increase participant outcomes, improve participant outcomes. That's basically it. And we want to work collaboratively around that to get there. And so even, well, as we're rostering this focus at the moment, any problems you've got in that area, and we've gathered some already, but really any more problems you've got in that area, we would love to consider and have a go into really understanding that, breaking that down, and working that into what we're doing. But any other problems as well outside of that, we're just really interested to keep gathering that information and making sure we're addressing the most important problems in the sector. And certainly in future, we'll do another webinar as this journey progresses, and perhaps show even more, show how this develops and how much further we are along in addressing some of the problems we've outlined here. Brilliant. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Yeah, feel free to communicate with us at all on LinkedIn or any other platform. And yeah, look, really would be grateful for any feedback.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks all.